This is your overnight wrap. The American Food and Drug Administration has decided at least 60 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine made at the contaminated Emergent BioSolutions plant must be discarded. This is according to an individual familiar with the situation. The agency, after an extensive safety review, has released 10 million doses for use, but according to a statement released by the agency on Friday. But how does contamination occur at a vaccination site? Medical science researcher Patrick Jolomba tells us more. Patrick, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Big question is exactly how this may have happened.
That is the question. That is the big question, and that is absolutely bizarre, because these kind of things or contamination are absolutely very, very rare. They don't really happen that often at all. So there are many things that could have happened. Certainly, contamination itself will actually invalidate every single piece of the vaccine that's been manufactured at that time. So there are lots of things that they will be looking at. Potential contamination could be to do with the staff, as we understand, particularly from this incident. So that could be human error related. So something went wrong that was not planned for. But exactly what, we are really looking into that.
Now, we also learned that AstraZeneca was also being produced in the same site. Of course, that raises fears of some South Africans who have received the jab, perhaps concerns that they may have received a contaminated jab. How likely is that?
That is very unlikely. As you probably understand, this is a manufacturing at a massive scale. This is manufactured by Johnson & Johnson, but the company in question, where this should have taken place, is actually a subcontract of Johnson & Johnson. And this company, Emergent BioSolutions, it manufactures, or it helps manufactures both the Johnson & Johnson, the AstraZeneca, but or some other vaccines as well. You probably know of the anthrax. This is the only company in the U.S. now authorized to manufacture anthrax. They also involve in other pharmaceuticals manufacturing of agents. But how this particular contamination has actually happened is very difficult to tell, because, as I said, this is a massive scale sort of manufacturing, and there are loads of processes. There are loads of processes involved. So where exactly, in what phase, again, that's something that perhaps the company know, but that has been investigated. But I think the reassurance that I have is, as I said, it's a subcontract. It is extremely unlikely that any other vaccine, perhaps in South Africa or in other countries, would have been affected in this manner. And there are checks and balances. There are quality control measures. That is why this has come out even before this kind of batch of vaccine have actually left the company. So I think the reassurance again to say is these batch have not actually left the company. So what's out there in the world is not contaminated, so to speak.
It's also reported that we have 2 million doses that have been manufactured and they're waiting at Aspen. Is it possible that South Africa may perhaps have a batch of the contaminated vaccines?
Batches are manufactured per country. They are manufactured based on where these batches will be going, and are monitored very extensively indeed. So, as I said, really the reassurance that I have is this is extremely unlikely. As the company said, or as we have seen, so the batches that have been contaminated, they have not left the company in the U.S., so to speak. So you would not see them anywhere else in the world. And had that happened, they would have obviously been recalled, and actually a different statement will be out there to say, well, potentially there could be some batches that have been affected somewhere else. As I said, again, I want to repeat that the checks and balances that are done are completely thorough. The regulatory bodies, the FDA, get involved as well to check even after the drug has been actually manufactured. So I think really there isn't anything outside what has been said. So I don't think anybody out there waiting to receive either the AstraZeneca, either the Johnson & Johnson should really worry about potential contamination or receiving anything that is potentially contaminated. So that's the reassurance. I think that's the good thing. The checks are absolutely stringent, so we should not worry about that at all.
Well, we're talking about at least 60 million vaccine doses here that may be contaminated. And as matters stand, looking at what's at stake, especially here in South Africa, with the cases increasing by the day, we entered a third wave, and not many people have been vaccinated according to a lot of the targets. What would this essentially mean for South Africa should it be found that there is a contaminated batch here? What would it mean for the overall vaccine rollout?
I think for the world, for the entire world, as you know now, this virus is actually on the rampage in probably in every single country, as you've seen in India, as you are now seeing in the UK here. The Indian variant, for example, again, seems to be, going off the roof. So, losing 60 million doses, that is catastrophe. Really, that is a drawback in terms of going forward in essence, trying to eradicate this virus. But the good thing again is these vaccines are manufactured in partnership with different subcontractors as you speak. So, for example, since they have realized there is a problem in this particular company, they're looking at other companies that they're working with. It's not just one company. That is the reassurance, again, that we probably have. So yes, to your question, this is catastrophe. This is a serious kind of drawback because we all need to move forward and get people vaccinated. But as for South Africa, for example, I don't think there should be anywhere in terms of, well, we're not going to receive less vaccines because of this ongoing contamination currently.
There have been many skeptics when it comes to actually going out and getting vaccinated. I mean, the elderly here in South Africa, over 60-year-olds, have the leeway to go and get vaccinated. But there have been fears and concerns already after hearing of the 8 women in the U.S. who were found to have experienced adverse side effects like the blood clotting and the big move that was made here in South Africa. What do you imagine that hearing of a contamination does to the overall drive to get more and more people vaccinated and the confidence in these vaccinations?
Vaccine hesitancy, vaccine confidence, globally is a problem. And it's actually a big problem, particularly amongst black and ethnic minorities throughout the world, lack of trust. And certainly, as you say, these kind of events, they're not helping at all in terms of, alleviating such fears, in terms of getting vaccine utilized throughout the world. But I think what we can do, we can always kind of drop the message home all the time and say, look, the tests that are done, they are very much similar to the tests that were done when these vaccines were being researched and were being trialed to try for efficacy. And now we know the position we are at globally is now millions and millions of people have now received these vaccines. And these adverse effects, or these kind of unusual effects that we mentioned, they're extremely rare indeed. And they're always, as we speak, being monitored. So the question we have to look at is, what is the biggest risk? Is the biggest risk, contracting the virus, potentially going to ICU, potentially dying from the virus, or we need to measure that against, that very slim chance of somebody developing clot related to perhaps these vaccines. I have said in the past, there are lots of things that can contribute to some of these side effects like development of clots. Women do take these estrogen contraceptive pills. So that on its own, it predisposes one to potentially developing some kind of clots. But the level of predisposition is not anywhere equivalent. So chances are, there is absolutely very little chance for that to happen. And that should again reassure the public or the world out there that the vaccines are extremely safe. The vaccines, they are designed to help us eradicate this monstrous virus as we can see now.
And very lastly, before we let you go, what are the other ways that a vaccine can likely get contaminated and then not be fit for use? I mean, we heard about the confusion and the controversies around the dates, the expiry dates of vaccines. That also was a cause for concern. But when it comes to the many other ways of contamination, what is it that needs to be looked at?
Since the whole progress is completely kind of rigorous, so it could be to do with transportation, for example. So when these vaccines are transported, we look at the packaging, the vial. If there is any little kind of damage, that potentially could lead to these vaccines not being okay to be used. So there are many phases. First of all, we need to look at how the vaccine is designed or is manufactured itself. This particular vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson, as you remember, is a viral vector-based vaccine. So just to put that in simple terms, so they created it using a fragment of another virus called adenovirus type 26, right? So that process of isolating that virus or growing that virus, isolating it, cleaning it, it's a process, again, that is monitored by different individuals. So these people, they wear different pieces of equipment, and it has to be done in a specific laboratory. And once that process has passed, it goes into another phase. Again, there's another checks and balances that are carried out again in that phase. So every single phase has got serious checks and balances. And I think, the good thing is we're talking about this possible contamination. What we need to remember is some of the measures that are being taken, that are really taken in abundance of cautions to say 60 million. You might find the batch is actually less than 60 million. And the real good thing is at least that has been found before these vaccines actually leave the manufacturing. So yeah, as to your question, there are many stages where contamination can actually take place. But the reassurance, again, as I keep saying, is every single stage is constantly monitored. So to do with transport, to do with storage, to do with using big containers that contains these vials, to do with temperature, for example. There are many different phases. But as public, we really shouldn't worry about that. We need to rest assured that these things are thoroughly taken care of.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time and your insight there. Medical science researcher Patrick Jolomba allaying fears, really, that all is well. There are no fears when it comes to the contamination and the reports of over 60 million doses of the vaccine.